There is a question that very few people ask, but that completely changes the way you will look at the Panama Canal. What if it had never been built? We are not talking about a vague philosophical hypothesis. We are talking about something that almost happened, and that, when it almost did, destroyed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. The year is 1879. Ferdinand de Lesseps, the man considered the greatest living engineer on the planet, the creator of the legendary Suez Canal, takes the stage in Paris before an audience of investors, politicians, and journalists. He has white hair, impeccable posture, and an audacious project in his hands: to cut the American continent in two, to connect the Atlantic to the Pacific, to shorten maritime routes around the world by weeks. The speech was hypnotic. Within months, more than 800,000 ordinary investors, teachers, doctors, merchants, retirees, put their savings into the project. The total raised exceeded 1 billion francs. It was the largest private enterprise in human history up to that point, and there was just one problem. Ferdinand de Lesseps was building on a lie. What Lesseps never publicly admitted, and what his engineers whispered among themselves, was that Panama was not Egypt. The Suez Canal had been dug through flat, dry, stable desert terrain. Panama was a dense jungle, with torrential rains reaching 4 meters per year, waterlogged soil that constantly collapsed, and microscopic wildlife that killed without a sound. Malaria and yellow fever decimated workers at a terrifying rate. During the peak years of French construction, an average of 200 workers died every month. Hastily built hospitals on the edges of the worksite became warehouses for the dead. Trenches dug with great effort during the day were swallowed by mud at night. In 10 years of trying, the French managed to excavate only a fraction of what was needed and lost more than 20,000 lives in the process. In 1889, Lesseps's company declared bankruptcy. The scandal that followed shook the French Third Republic to its foundations. It was discovered that journalists, parliamentarians, and ministers had been bribed to hide the truth from investors. It was one of the greatest corruption cases of the 19th century. And the canal, abandoned, an open wound in the jungle. But what no one imagined was that the real nightmare was still to come, and it would not be human. The canal was dead. The jungle had won. But in 1904, an American engineer arrived in Panama, looked at that open scar in the earth, and made a decision no one expected. He was not going to dig deeper. He was going to do something no engineer had ever attempted before, something that would forever change the relationship between human beings and nature. When the United States took over the project in 1904, the scene they found was desolate. Rust-eaten machines sunk in the mud, wooden structures rotted by humidity, and an international reputation in ruins. No one in the world believed the project was viable. The American Congress itself debated for months whether it would be better to build the canal through Nicaragua, where the terrain seemed more favorable. But engineer John Stevens arrived in Panama, looked at the problem, and did something the French had never done. He stopped digging. Before any excavation, Stevens completely reorganized the logistics. He built proper housing for the workers, reformed the railway system that removed excavated earth, and above all, called in physician William Gorgas. Gorgas held a theory that was radical for the time. Malaria and yellow fever were transmitted by mosquitoes, not by humid air or contaminated water. Swamps were drained, brush was cleared, water barrels were covered, screens were installed on every window. Within 2 years, the diseases that had killed 20,000 people were virtually eliminated from the region. Only then did Stevens order the resumption of excavations, and this time with a radically different plan. The great intellectual turning point of the American project was abandoning the idea of a sea-level canal. It seemed obvious that a canal should be flat, like a road between two oceans. But Stevens and his engineers realized that trying to level Panama's mountains was an impossible battle. The terrain was too rugged, landslides were constant, and the volume of excavation required would be astronomically greater than any French estimate. The solution was inverted and brilliant. Instead of lowering the mountains to sea level, they would raise the ships to the level of the mountains. They built a massive dam on the Chagres River, artificially creating Lake Gatun, one of the largest artificial lakes in the world at the time, with a water level 26 meters above both oceans. The lake would serve as a liquid bridge over the continent. To raise and lower ships to that height, they designed the locks, giant concrete chambers that would function as water elevators. The ingenuity was in the detail. The chambers would fill and empty exclusively by gravity, without a single electric pump. Water pressure did all the work. A solution any middle school physics student could understand, but one that required extraordinary audacity to implement on an epic scale. What the engineers did not yet know, however, was that the greatest threat to the canal was not in the mountains. It was hidden in something far simpler and far more fragile. The lake was ready, the locks were built, but there was a question no one had yet answered. How do you raise a 100,000-ton ship 8 stories high in less than 10 minutes, without a single pump, without a single large motor, using only the invisible force of gravity? The answer lies inside the chambers, and it will change the way you see engineering forever. Imagine a 300-meter-long ship, loaded with 12,000 containers, weighing more than 100,000 tons. Now imagine that ship entering a concrete chamber where the gap between the hull and the wall is just 60 centimeters on each side. 60 centimeters. That is less than the width of your shoulders. This is the daily reality of the Panama Canal locks, and what happens inside them is one of the most impressive precision operations ever carried out by human engineering. When a ship enters the chamber, special electric locomotives, called mules, a name inherited from the animals that once pulled cargo along ancient trade routes, attached to the hull with steel cables and take control of its positioning. The ship's captain, no matter how experienced, yields command to a specialized canal pilot who knows every centimeter of that structure. The ship's speed inside the lock does not exceed 3 kilometers per hour. Then the gates close, and the spectacle begins. Hidden valves in the walls open silently, and 190,000 cubic meters of water, the equivalent of 76 Olympic swimming pools, begin flowing into the chamber driven by gravity alone. In 8 minutes, the ship rises 8.5 meters. No pumps, no motors, just physics. The most underestimated element of the entire system is the gates. At first glance, they look like simple steel doors, but each leaf weighs 700 tons, stands 25 meters tall, and was designed around a principle that puzzles any engineer who sees it for the first time. It is hollow. That is right. Hollow and watertight, which makes it buoyant. The buoyancy dramatically reduces the effective weight on the hinges and allows relatively compact electric motors to open and close them with ease. But the ingenuity goes further. The 2 leaves of each gate do not form a straight wall. They form a slightly curved triangle, with the vertex pointing toward the side of greatest water pressure. The greater the pressure on the higher volume side, the more forcefully the leaves are pressed against each other, creating a perfect seal. The system is self-reinforcing. The more it needs to resist, the more resistant it becomes. This simple mechanism, conceived in the early 20th century, operated without a single serious structural failure for more than 100 years. But the system has a vulnerability its creators knew well, and that the 21st century has made existential. To function, the locks need water, a great deal of water. Every time a ship passes through, 200 million liters of fresh water are discharged into the ocean irreversibly, and the only reservoir that feeds the entire system depends on one single thing: rain. In July 2023, the sensors at Lake Gatun began recording something canal operators had never seen before. The water level was falling day after day without stopping. Within weeks, 130 ships were standing still, waiting, billions of dollars frozen in place, and the cause was no mechanical failure, no human error, no attack. It was simply the absence of rain. In July 2023, something silent and devastating began happening at Lake Gatun. The water level, which should have remained stable throughout the year, began to drop. Slowly at first, imperceptible to anyone not monitoring the sensors, but within weeks, the decline became alarming. That year's El Niño phenomenon was one of the most intense in decades, and its direct consequence in Panama was a historic drought. The rains that should have replenished the lake simply did not come, and without enough water in the lake, the locks could not operate at normal capacity. Canal management made an unprecedented decision. It reduced the number of daily crossings from 40 to 24 ships, then to 18. It imposed draft restrictions, the maximum depth a ship's hull could reach, forcing large container ships to sail at half their cargo capacity, leaving thousands of containers behind in ports scattered across the globe. The queue of ships waiting to enter the canal reached 130 vessels. Wait times extended to 3 weeks. Liquefied natural gas carriers rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. Bulk carriers redesigned routes through the Strait of Magellan. Marine insurance premiums surged, and the clock of global trade began to run slower. What the 2023 crisis revealed was something the engineers of the early 20th century could not precisely foresee. The Panama Canal, that engineering marvel connecting 2 oceans, is entirely dependent on the climate of a small watershed of just over 3,300 square kilometers. The full weight of global maritime trade, roughly 5% of everything that moves across the world's oceans, rests on the amount of rain that falls in a tropical forest in Central America. The economic losses that year were calculated in the hundreds of millions of dollars for the canal alone. For the global supply chain, the impacts were far greater and more diffuse. Delays in the delivery of electronic components, rising grain prices, disruption in the supply of industrial chemicals. The long-term solution requires the construction of a new reservoir on the Indio River, a $100 million project approved only in 2024, after decades of legal and environmental deadlock. The new locks built in 2016 already brought an important improvement. Their lateral water recycling tanks reduce water consumption per transit by 60%. But it is not enough, because the problem is not merely technological, it is climatic, and the climate is changing faster than any reservoir can be built. The question no one wants to answer out loud is, what if the next drought is even more severe? What happens to the world when the canal stops completely? But there is something the engineers of the 20th century anticipated, something that for 100 years silently prevented all of this from becoming a catastrophe. It is not a dam. It is not a reservoir. It is a detail so simple it fits on a single sheet of paper. And without it, not one ship would have crossed that canal safely even once. There is a question that hangs in the air after everything we have seen. How did a system so complex, so dependent on external factors, so exposed to the brute force of massive ships and the unpredictability of nature, function for more than 100 years without a single catastrophic failure? The answer lies in the detail we mentioned at the very beginning, one that now, after understanding everything that is at stake, makes even more sense. The lock gates are not merely steel doors. They are the hidden masterpiece of the entire project. Each gate is made up of 2 leaves that, when closed, form an angle, a triangle with the vertex pointing toward the side of greatest pressure. This design ensures that the greater the difference in water level between the 2 sides, the more firmly the leaves seal shut. The water pressure does not try to force the gates open, it locks them, and when they need to open, simply equalize the water levels on both sides of the chamber. When the pressure equalizes, the leaves, each weighing 700 tons, move with the ease of a refrigerator door. The engineers of the early 20th century created a mechanism that turns the force of nature against itself, one that requires almost no energy to operate. 100 years of operation, dozens of earthquakes, tropical storms, 2 world wars. The gates withstood everything, but the engineers went even further. They knew that no matter how perfect the design, an accident was always possible. And an accident involving a gate under maximum pressure could be apocalyptic. A wave of fresh water rushing toward the ocean, destroying the ship, flooding the chambers, collapsing the structure. So they installed 3 independent lines of protection. The first, steel chains tensioned beneath the water's surface, stopping any vessel that tries to advance before receiving clearance. The second, emergency gates embedded in the chamber walls, capable of blocking the flow within seconds. The third, and most robust, backup gates positioned 15 meters behind the main ones, a second wall that activates if everything else fails. It is layered redundancy, the same principle aeronautical engineers use to ensure a plane never goes down from a single failure. The Panama Canal is not a marvel because it has never had problems. It is a marvel because it was designed to survive its own problems. And it is precisely that which makes its current situation so unsettling. The one thing for which there is no redundancy is water. There is no emergency gate that replaces rain. There is no engineering that recreates a lake. The greatest challenge facing the world's most famous canal is not mechanical, not financial, not geopolitical. It is climatic. And the clock is running. The question is no longer whether a new crisis will happen. It is when. and whether the world will be ready for it.